Now you are familiar with the concept of urban essential services. Let's see how protracted conflicts affect these services. In this lecture, you will learn to describe the different types of impacts on essential urban services encountered in humanitarian crises. Then you will be able to explain the resulting impacts on civilian population and public health. Protracted conflicts have different types of impacts on urban essential services. We can differentiate the direct impact, which is the immediate and physical impact caused directly by armed conflict, such as damages to essential urban infrastructure due to a bombing. The indirect impact, which derives from direct impact affecting an associated component of a system, usually in the short to medium term. An example is the brain drain that occurs following attacks on staff. This impact can accumulate over time, resulting, for instance, in a lack of maintenance planning due to insufficient long-term staffing. Now let's see more into details how these different types of impact affect the three critical elements of essential services. One of the obvious direct impact on people is the casualties among essential staff due to the conflict. As a result, there are fewer staff reporting to work and fewer staff willing to go to the field to conduct routine operations and maintenance work. Another direct impact on people is poor or complete lack of access to a service component. Here, an example of the ICRC providing secured access to municipal workers in order to perform emergency repairs. An indirect impact on critical people occurs when armed conflict and sanctions begin to affect the country's economy. It often results in staff salaries being reduced or delayed. As a consequence, staff services resign or lose motivation, reducing the likelihood of routine operation and maintenance from being carried out. We have seen that destruction or damage to infrastructure and equipment is an example of direct impact on hardware. However, this picture does not illustrate a direct impact, but an indirect one. Indeed, this pipe is leaking not because of explosive munition, but due to the coping mechanism of people affected. The inhabitants were no longer supplied by the main network, and they made holes in the nearest pipes in order to have access to water. Sometimes, coping mechanisms from inhabitants can result in negative effect on public health. Another example of indirect impact on critical hardware is this water pumping station. In that case, functional equipment were removed gradually by water utility staff to a more crucial part of the system in order to respond to an emergency. As a result, this water pumping was rendered completely inoperable. We call this phenomena cannibalization of critical hardware components. Direct impact on critical consumables is related primarily to the destruction, such as in this picture of the destruction of a warehouse of an electrical utility following a bombing. As a result, the electrical company lost its capacity to react to breakdowns. Looting of water or electricity providers' warehouses is a classic example of indirect impact on critical consumables, as we can see here in the picture of a looted water treatment plant. Cumulative impact is the long-term deterioration in the performance of essential services through incremental direct and indirect impacts on one or more of the critical components of the essential services. Cumulative impact on essential services can be seen as a vicious cycle influenced by direct and indirect impacts. The accumulation ultimately affects public health and may contribute to the very conflict which created it. The cycle of impacts, therefore, lies within the cycles of conflict that characterize complex emergencies. The cumulative impact of protracted armed conflict on public health is much more difficult to track than its impact on the quality of coverage of any essential service. One short disruption to the drinking water supply, as might be expected at the start of the hostilities, can greatly increase the probability of infection from diseases already present in the environment if the quality of the service was originally reliable. As people immunity builds up with repeated disruptions to the water service, it is difficult to generalize the impact that any disruption would have on general health of the population. However, the risk of a sustained increase in the incidence of endemic diseases is enhanced as the conflict drives more people and strains of illness into the city, particularly when the movements of people are coupled with poor general treatment of water and wastewater and incomplete immunization campaigns. Direct, indirect, cumulative. I hope now that you are clear about the distinction of those different types of impact of protracted conflict on essential urban services. Direct damage to infrastructure from explosive munitions attracts the most attention. But remember, field experience suggests that the cumulative impact is the most destructive and the most difficult to recover from.